Hey there, belongers. Welcome to the fourth edition of Christmas at the Movies, our Christmas series that's talking about how Jesus came in an unexpected way to a place that wasn't expecting him. And how, as we looked at some classic Christmas movies like Charlie Brown and The Grinch and some of the other classic Christmas movies, we discovered that we can see glimpses of Jesus' move into the neighborhood through these classic movies. I have a confession to make. I don't think this is the first time I've said it, but I've not always been a big-time lead-up to Christmas person. I mean, the lead-up to Christmas has not been my favorite thing. I'm not saying I've hated it, but I just don't like it. What I love is Christmas Eve. Because during Christmas Eve, I used to go shopping. I told you that last week. I would go shopping until Amazon and online shopping ruined that for me. LOL. But I really like that. And so I would go shopping, and then I would begin to cook dinner for the guests that were coming on Christmas Day. I like to do big dinners, and so I would love to do big dinners. And just I would end my Christmas Eve night, watching my favorite classic Christmas movie. And I'm not going to tell you about that today. I'm going to tell you about that next week. And then going to bed at about midnight and getting woken up in the next day by my kids. I think films are a big part to the lead up to Christmas. One of the Christmas films that Jay and apparently the Impact students here at Salem Fields really, really, really love is The Polar Express. And it's a good film, and I say good film, I didn't say great film, it's a good film, and a lot of people, even adults, love The Polar Express. The Polar Express follows the story of a young boy who goes to sleep on Christmas Eve and is awakened by this huge steam engine train outside of his window. And he goes outside and he asks the conductor what's going on and where the train is going. And the conductor replies, why? We're going to the North Pole, of course. This is the Polar Express. And after some doubt, the little boy climbs on board and discovers that he's not the only one headed to the North Pole. During the journey, the conductor comes and he begins to punch tickets and take tickets, and we soon learn that one of the passengers, a little girl, does not have her ticket. And with her ticket nowhere to be found, the conductor takes her out of the car, takes her on top in a snowstorm on top of the train, and heads towards the engine of the train to the front. And shortly after that, the boy finds the lost ticket, and he bravely heads up on the roof of the carriages to return. Don't try that at home, because that's movie magic. It's here on the roof of the carriages where, for the first time, the boy meets the hobo, a ghost who lives on the Polar Express. The encounter is one of the most important scenes in the whole film. It sets the direction from every major scene that will follow. Watch this.
Is there something I can do for you?
I'm looking for a girl.
Hey, we all!
I have her ticket.
Oh, hey, looky here. Oh, this is an official, authentic, genuine ticket to ride. Oh, you better keep this in a safe place, young man. If I was you, I keep all my valuables right here in the old size 13. Experience shows this is the safest place. Not that I have much use for those tickets. I ride for free. Oh yeah. I hop aboard this rattler anytime I feels like it. I own this train. Oh, yeah. It's like I'm the king of this train. Yeah, the king of the Polex. In fact, I am the king of the North Pole! Now, where's my map? Sit. Take a load of it. Hey, would you like some Joe? Nice, hot refreshment, perfect for a cold winter's night. Bless you.
What about, Santa?
Santa.
Isn't he the king of the North Pole?
You mean this guy? What exactly is your persuasion on the big man, since you brought him up?
Well, I want to believe. But
You don't want to be bamboozled. You don't want to be led down the primrose path. You don't want to be caught or duped. Have the wool pulled over your eyes. Hoodwinked. You don't want to be taken for a ride. Railroaded. Seeing is believing. Am I right?
I love that scene. At the heart of the Polar Express is a question. What does it take to believe? Let me say that again. What does it take to believe? And it's the scene where the boy meets the hobo, and for the first time we see it's important, because for the first time we see that the boy really wants to believe, but only if it was true that the Santa Claus existed. And as the hobo gives voice to the boy's doubts, we encounter one of the most important lines in the whole film: seeing is believing. Seeing is believing. In other words, you don't have to believe everything that you can back up. Like, if you can't back it up with facts, and if you can't back it up with empirical data, hard evidence, you don't have to believe it. Sounds right. Sounds good, right? Sounds logical. Sounds reasonable even. Well, as we look at Matthew 2, verses 1 through 15, we're going to put that claim to the test. Listen to what the scripture says. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem village, Judah's territory, this was during Herod's kingship, a band of scholars arrived from Jerusalem from the east. They asked around, where can we find and pay homage to the newborn king of the Jews? We've observed this star in the eastern sky that signaled his birth, and we're on a pilgrimage to worship him. And when the word of his inquiry got to Herod, he was terrified, but not Herod alone, but all of Jerusalem as well. I mean, can you imagine a whole kind of tribe, a whole group of magi coming into town? That would make its way, even without the internet, through the whole community. And so they were terrified as well. Herod lost no time. He gathered the high priests and the religious scholars in the city together and asked, where is the Messiah supposed to be born? And they told him, Bethlehem, Judah's territory. The prophet Micah wrote it plainly, it's you, Bethlehem, in Judah's land, no longer bringing up the rear. From you will come the leader who will shepherd, rule my people, my Israel. Herod then arranged a secret meeting with the scholars from the east, pretending to be as devout as they were. He got them to tell him exactly when the birth announcement star appeared. Then he told them the prophecy about Bethlehem. And he said, go and find the child. Leave no stone unturned. And as soon as you find him, send word, and I'll join you at once in your worship. And instructed by the king, they set off. And then the star appeared again, the same star they had seen in the eastern sky. It led them on until it hovered over the place of the child. They could hardly contain themselves. They were in the right place. They had arrived at the right time. And they entered the house and saw the child in the arms of Mary, his mother. Overcome, they kneeled and worshiped him. And then they opened their luggage and presented gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And in a dream, they were warned not to report back to Herod, so they worked out another route, left the territory without being seen, and returned to their own country. And after the scholars were gone, God's angel showed up again to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get the child, get up, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, stay until you get further notice." Herod is on a hunt for the child and wants to kill him. And so Joseph obeyed. He got up, he took the child and his mother under the cover of darkness, and they were out of town way on their way by daylight. They lived in Egypt until Herod's death. The Egyptian exile fulfilled what Hosea had prophesied. "I called my son out of Egypt." So we're going to look at this passage under two headings today. And I want you to write them down. Seeing is believing, verses 1 through 7, and the believing is seeing, verses 8 through 15. Seeing is believing. I mean, the plot line of Matthew 2:1-15 is really simple enough. A group of magi have seen a star rise and come to Jerusalem in search for a king of the Jews. And after a quick stopover in Jerusalem, they head to Bethlehem, worship the child, give him some gifts, and they head home. What does that have to do with the relationship between evidence and faith? Where rather than focus on the storyline of the chapter, I like us to think about the evidence that Matthew presents to us and how the characters react to the plot line. Matthew introduces us to two sets of characters in this story. He introduces us to Herod the Great, and then he introduces us to the Magi, or the wise men from the east. The Magi, let's talk about them. I mean, for centuries, Christian tradition has built up layers and stories and myths and all kinds of festive gift givers. But the truth is, we know very little about the Magi. Matthew doesn't give us names. He doesn't tell us the country that they came from. He doesn't tell us how many there were. He doesn't even call them kings. He doesn't even call them wise men. He calls them magi. They're astrologers, I guess. Like in the first century, Brian Cox crossed with Mystic Meg. I mean, the thing is, Matthew is not so interested in who they are or who they were and where they come from, but what they did. That's what Matthew focuses on the most, what they did. Having seen a new star rising, they travel in search of the one, right? The one who has been born King of the Jews. Coming to the capital city expecting to find the newborn king, they instead meet Herod the Great. Now let's talk about Herod a little bit. I mean, we know a lot more about him. I mean, he's not often seen on Christmas cards for a really good reason. I mean, Herod wasn't a fan of the first Christmas story. I mean, Herod did some great things. I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. He refurbished the temple in Jerusalem. But he also did some terrible things toward the end of his life, like kill his favorite wife, right? And assassinate or kill his two sons because of his paranoid kind of mentality when it came to keeping power. It turns out that Herod was great. Well, not so great. Having introduced us to the characters, then Matthew begin to talk about the Magi's reason to coming to Jerusalem. He starts out to lay out the evidence that supports the Magi claim that the King of the Jews is born. We're told in verse 2 that the Magi have been waiting for the arrival of the King ever since they saw the star rise. In the ancient world, stars or planets were studied. And when a star or planet rose, it kind of often, people in the ancient world believed it was the mark of some kind of new king or some kind of important ruler. But more amazingly, we're told that the Magi have come to worship this king. So they obviously believe he's no ordinary ruler. I mean, even though Herod likes to style himself as Herod the Great, the King of the Jews, he was not a Jew himself. I mean, so the idea of a true, maybe even divine king that's coming to power would have scared Herod. It would have made Herod paranoid. It would have caused him some discomfort. And so he does the research of his own, because verses 5 and 6 says he gathers all the scholars together, all the wise people together to ask the question, where is Christ the Anointed One to be born? And then through them, he gives us two pieces of evidence. Because 2 miles away in the little town of Bethlehem, they tell Herod, and then they quote the actual prophecy about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem, a prophecy that had happened long ago. But you, Bethlehem, David's country, the runt of the litter, from you will come the leader who will shepherd rule Israel. He'll be no upstart, no pretender. His family tree is ancient and distinguished. Matthew 5:2 is part of the prophecy that promises the great ruler of Israel is going to be born in Bethlehem, a king who would overthrow foreign rulers and usher in a new age of peace and prosperity for the Jewish people. Perhaps this is what sent Herod over the edge. I mean, if I'm an illegitimate king put into power by Caesar Augustus, a king that the people have to tolerate, and all of a sudden the prophesied king shows up, maybe my time is just about over. So the story goes that he summons the Magi, and they tell him about this star. And if we look at the characters in verse 1, the way we see that Matthew is recording a fact that surrounds the birth of Jesus. It's a reminder that the birth of Jesus is more than just a story to tell the children at Christmas. Matthew presents it to us as history, a real story linked to real people like King Herod, history happening in real places like Jerusalem and Bethlehem, history taking place in real time and space in such a way that fulfills a prophecy made more than 700 years earlier by a prophet who is now long ago dead and buried. If seeing is believing, then based on Matthew's evidence, the only logical conclusion we can come to is that Jesus Christ had been born. The King of the Jews come to usher in God's perfect kingdom of peace and justice, a king who would come to rescue God's people from sin and death once and for all. But if seeing is also really believing, like the hobo in the Polar Express said that night, then why is it that we're about to see that the Magi and Herod react so differently to the same exact evidence? If seeing is believing, why didn't Herod react the way that the Magi reacted? Why present it with the same facts, the big difference? I want to introduce to you to another thought. Not seeing is believing, but believing is seeing. Let's look at a second point, believing is seeing, 9-13. As the plot of the Polar Express kind of chugs along on the idea that we should only believe what we can see, that fact begins to be challenged. Watch this.
Walking up here, it's mighty slick, I tell you. What? There you go. What did I tell you? What did I tell you? Years ago, on my first Christmas Eve run, I was up on the roof making my rounds when I slipped on the ice myself. I reached out for a hand iron, but it broke off. I slid and fell, and yet I did not fall off this train.
Someone saved you?
Or something.
An angel.
Maybe.
Wait. Well, what did he look like? Did you see him?
No, sir. But sometimes seeing is believing. And sometimes the most real things in the world are the things we can't see.
Did you hear what was said at the end? That some things need to be believed to be seen. In other words, seeing is believing can only get you so far. Sometimes, in order to believe, you have to see. In order to believe, you have to believe in order to see. We see this in how Herod and the Magi act on the evidence that they've learned. Let's look at Herod first this time. Then he told them the prophecy about Bethlehem and said, "Go and find the child. Leave no stone unturned. And as soon as you find him, send word so that I may join you in your worship." On first glance, it seems like Herod, who initially so troubled by the Magi news, has now had a change of heart. But the plot goes dark at this point. Herod the Great is using the Magi, using them so that he can find the child to destroy the child because of his paranoia. I mean, he leads them to believe that he wants to worship, but he really doesn't want to worship. And so Herod has in his mind that this threat must be stopped at all costs. Herod has all the evidence he needs to see Jesus as his Savior, but not the faith to make sense of it. Now let's think about the Magi. Unlike Herod, they actually demonstrate great faith. Faith that starts where to begin the search. I mean, they had little very evidence. All they saw was a star. And on this star, they decided to discover, decided to search, decided to do research. All they had was a star in the night sky. And that star leads them to believe that our important Jewish king is about to be born somewhere 700 miles away. So they set off, probably with servants and assistants. I mean, and at great personal financial costs. I mean, they don't just travel at 3 people like we see in the traditional manger scenes. They would have had camel after camel. They would have luggage. They would have had enough food to make the whole journey. They would have had assistance. They don't know the time or date of the birth. They don't know what he even looks like, what city or town he's born in, what family he comes from. All they know is that this king is worthy of their worship. And as they gather more evidence along the way, the evidence shows them that their faith has not been betrayed. In fact, evidence confirms it, helping them see that this long-expected king more clearly, to the point when they see the star hanging over the place where the child and his mother were, they are totally overjoyed. I talked about joy last week. They are overjoyed. They are joyed beyond joy, beyond joy, beyond joy, because their faith has not betrayed them. Finally, in verse 11, their faith rewards them with what their hearts desire most. Matthew tells us they could hardly contain themselves. I mean, they were at the right place. They had arrived at the right time. They entered the house and saw the child in the arms of Mary, his mother, and overcome, they kneeled down and worshiped him and presented him with gifts. Gifts which in God's providence only further hint at Jesus' true identity. Gold is for a king. Incense used in temple worship, which together with the Magi's worship tells us that this is more than just a baby. This is God clothed in human flesh and blood. Myrrh, a perfume used in celebration and for embalming bodies. In fact, the shadow of death lies across this whole passage. You see, the one who is called King of the Jews at his birth is also called King of the Jews at his death. In chapter 27, verse 37, Matthew records that on the cross above his head, they posted this sign, criminal charge against him. This is Jesus, King of the Jews. The final gift is a major clue that Jesus was born to die. Not a tragic accident, but God's foreordained plan to bring about great joy as Jesus pays the price to redeem us from sin and death and the grave. Herod sees the evidence, but fails to believe. The Magi believe, and with every step of belief and faith they take, they're able to see Jesus more clearly. So let's kind of wrap this up. So what do? Do you look at evidence or faith? Of all the world religions, I think Christianity values evidence-based belief. I mean, the Bible does not encourage us to go on wishful thinking or closed-mindedness or unconsidered belief or blind faith. Instead, it wants us to examine the truth for ourselves, to know what we believe and why we believe it. In short, Christianity encourages us to seek out truth, to know truth, to seek it out, to investigate, to scrutinize the evidence of who Jesus claimed to be and what he claimed to do. And yet the Bible tells us unashamedly that Christian is a faith-based belief system. This means if you're waiting until you get all the facts, you're going to miss it. If you're waiting for all the I's to be dotted and the T's to be crossed before you make a decision about Jesus for yourself, you'll never have enough. Evidence helps us to understand that that faith in Jesus is reasonable and rational. But the star that the Magi saw helped them to step out on faith. In Matthew's accounts of the Magi's arrival, only faith can ultimately arrange the evidence so that we see Jesus really clearly. I don't know what you are looking for. I don't know what you are faithing for. I made up my own word today. I don't know what challenge you're going through and what you're dealing with in your personal life. Maybe it's financial, maybe it's relationship-based, whatever it is. It's this stepping out on faith and believing before you see. I always say believing will help you see what you believe, right? And so believing helps you to see what's going on. Eventually, we all must look at the facts and ask ourselves, is God trying to tell me something about Jesus or not? And if he is, am I willing to believe it even if though I don't fully understand it? The 12th century Christian philosopher Anselm of Canterbury called this relationship between evidence and faith and belief, faith-seeking understanding. This is what he says: I do not understand in order to believe. I believe in order to understand. Let me say that again. I do not understand in order to believe. I believe in order to understand. In the Polar Express, the Hobo tells the boys and us that seeing is believing. But the rest of the film, and Matthew 2:1-15, shows us that seeing is believing is not enough. We also must believe in order to see. Finally, this all comes to a head when at midnight in the town square at the North Pole, jostling crowds push and shove to get a glimpse of Santa. The boy tries to see over the crowd, but he's too short and clearly still wrestling with his doubts. The boy puts his concerns aside and scrunching his eyes, he says with growing conviction, I believe. Watch this.
Okay. I believe. I believe.
What was that you said?
I believe. I believe.
Great scene. And who should walk up at that moment but old Santa Claus himself? It's the climactic moment. The score soars in the background, and you can't help but kind of feel warm all over. Perhaps the thread that runs through the film is that it's okay to base our beliefs on evidence, but eventually you have to decide what actually you believe for yourself. And sometimes that requires a leap of faith. So what do you believe? And how does that belief change how you act, how you walk, how you talk, what goes on with your attitude? What do you need to believe for today? Some of you need to believe for salvation. Some of you listening to me do not have a relationship with the Lord. And today you can look all around. Your creation talks about evidence that God exists. And our own hearts can convict us that Jesus moved into the neighborhood. But at some point in the journey, we have to take a leap of faith. The boy belief leads him to finally see Santa for himself. And the Magi beliefs lead them to see and worship Jesus for themselves. So what do you need to believe for today? What seems impossible in your life today? What are you going through that seems like you can't get over and you can't get around? Maybe you have doubt today. Maybe your doubt is fixed on something that makes sense. But at some point in the journey, seeing as believing will only take you so far. At some point in the journey, to really see, you gotta believe first. So what do you believe in God for today? What issue are you going through? What are you struggling with that you just need to say, God, I can't see it all. I only see glimpses. But I'm willing to believe so that I can see you more clearly. Today, there's someone listening to this, and you're at your wit's end. The Christmas season has done you in. And sometimes you're going through stuff that you begin to doubt whether God exists at all, whether this is just another fairy tale that religious people give us just to make things work. Today, I want to challenge you to, like the little boy that Jesus was going to heal, or that little boy's father, to say out of your mouth, I believe, help my unbelief. No matter what the situation is today, you can believe and see, and that will make all the difference. Watch this last scene.
At one time, most of my friends could hear the bell. But as years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I've grown old, the bell still rings for me, as it does for all who truly believe.
I love that scene. You can believe even now. See, this story is not just for little kids. This story of Jesus moving to the neighborhood, of Jesus and the nativity, the Magi, Herod, the whole story is not just for the little folks, it's for us big folks too. See, the little folks sometimes believe a lot easier than we do. Sometimes we have so much around us that encourages us not to believe. It still takes a leap of faith, and you can still hear the bells chime if you move into a mindset that says, believing is seeing. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you. Thank you for this real sense of faith that says that we don't have to know everything to believe in the one who does know everything. That we don't have to experience everything in our senses to believe that you came and that you died and that you got up on Easter Sunday morning. You call us to believe without seeing. You said, greater things. It's great that you have seen to believe, but greater things are in store for those who believe before they see. Help us to be those people. Whether we are giving our lives to the Lord for the very first time right now, or we've been serving you forever. There are things that seem impossible. We have loved ones that need to know you as Lord, and it seems impossible. Would you help us to believe before we see? We have obstacles that we're going through and maybe even forgiving people, and we just feel like we can never forgive them. But would you help us to believe before we see? We have we go through financial struggles, and it seems like we're never going to get out of debt. We're never going to get this handled. Would you help us to believe before we see and then begin to act on it? Father, thank you for the example of the Magi who came from the east, who decided to believe before they could actually see. And because they believed, they were actually able to see what they believed. Help us to go and do likewise. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. See you next week.